Rob, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Najma, for having me on. I'm excited to dive into the topics today that we're going to discuss.
Yeah, so am I. Now, first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm hanging out here in Littleton, Colorado, just outside of Denver in the beautiful mountains and beautiful weather today, for sure, a little bit brisk. But yeah, so I'm here in Colorado and married to my beautiful wife, Jennifer, two awesome kids. My son Zeke's 13, daughter's 11. And I am just in this world and field of helping people figure out who they are in Christ, whether they're coming out of addiction or struggling just life transition and everything. And just here to be a servant and help people, again, get out of the rut, is the name of my business, is Lifted from the Rut. So it's like pulling people out of their rut. And Lord knows I've been in enough ruts in my life that I get it. I understand.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your journey. You've got quite an interesting story to tell.
Yeah, I always say my journey's like a roller coaster, right? And sometimes the train stays on the track, and sometimes it doesn't. And but yeah, I mean, I grew up was born in Indiana, here in the States, and grew up in a Christian home, and really just kind of had a recipe for living a good life. And for some odd reason, who knows? Say it was it God's destiny or story or whatever for your life? I don't know, but the bottom line is I just fell into a world of alcohol and drugs and gambling and lying and stealing and and just cheating for a good chunk of my I guess not a good chunk. My teenage years and my 20s were that's kind of what my life was like. And it was dark and it was lonely, but it was exciting and it was plentiful and it was just all the yin and yang of life and just being pulled in all these different directions. So that was it. My life just involved a lot around addiction and just being emotionally immature.
Yeah, and these things can seem exciting at the time. When you get into these things, they actually seem exciting. Whilst looking back, perhaps they don't so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're a kid trying to figure out life, right? And again, growing up, going to church and being part of the church community. I mean, I was the, I guess the chameleon, like a lot of my friends were. I call it living the life of a chameleon. We were just trying to fit in, blend in, but stand out, right? And when we were scared and stuff, we'd blend in. And when we were feeling confident, we'd stand out in our robustness and our energy and the things that we did as kids. But I think part of it was just trying to figure out who we were and trying to fit in. And what I didn't have, which was interesting, is growing up in a Christian home and all that stuff, was I never really fully understood, as we were talking earlier before the show, is really what does it mean to live my life from my identity in Christ and who God says I am.
Yeah.
I never got that part as a kid, as a Christian, and over time I let society define me. I let girlfriends and jobs and my bank account. I just let all this external stuff really define me. And those were just ugly definitions sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I think most people do. They do let their circumstance, their situation, their grades, their qualifications, their job especially, and close relationships define who they are.
Yeah, and those can change daily, right? It's like your friends can think of you one way one day, or your girlfriend, or and that can sway the personal opinion of how I used to see myself, because I wasn't confident in who I was. I was just I remember getting some therapy one time, and my therapist had these two pictures on his wall. And on one wall that was behind him was this picture of just a sailboat in the middle of the sea, you could tell it was just getting thrashed and tossed around, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of like my life. And then in front of me, he had this picture of a tranquil lake, just a sailboat sitting on the lake, peaceful, no ripples. And he goes, Rob, to get you from this chaotic life you're living to the tranquil lake, that would be very unnerving for you because it would feel weird and odd. Right. So somehow we got to figure out why your life's so chaotic to get you back over there. And that's kind of how I felt through, middle school and high school and college and, early young adult, professional life, of just because it was always around alcohol, drugs, partying and really living for the moment and not even thinking about the future.
Yeah. And you said earlier on about you didn't have your identity in Christ. You had your identity from these other things. And do you feel that in church we don't get taught enough about our identity in Christ?
Yeah, I think we hear about the part of, kind of living a good life, and and there isn't a whole lot. I don't feel like, I think there is more now, but back then it wasn't a whole lot of talk about like the spiritual battles that we go through of like, really the fight for our lives of, society and Satan and everybody over here wanting to pull you this way. And now, I mean, I think of like being a kid now with social media and like Snapchat and all these different avenues that people can do. And, oh, I got 2 likes or nobody liked me. Just, I mean, the emotional turmoil that kids got to go through now, especially having an 11 and 13-year-old, is so much heightened than it was, I feel like, back when I was, because I'm 49 right now. So back when I was a kid, but regardless, back then, yes, it was that thing of, I never really truly understood. And it wasn't talked about in my house a lot. Like, what does it truly mean to have your identity in Christ? Like, it's great to have Christ as our savior, but the whole lordship part, I really don't think is talked about enough today, but sure as heck wasn't back then.
Yeah, and I think even today, I think maybe some churches it's talked about, some parts of the church it's talked about, and then other, it might depend on what type of church you go to or something.
Yeah, not your seeker-friendly church by any means, too. And in my world now, because I'm a professional interventionist and I help families like really unravel that part, but in the world of addiction that I'm involved in a lot, there is so much lost identity and shame and guilt, and on the family side and the loved one that has the addiction side. And so to be a part of that process now and help people navigate that and just say, hey, look, we can look where we are now. Everything has happened up to this point. Now, if we look forward, what are we going to do to really figure out like the truth of who we are, and just help people and families really see that, just the identity piece within their own family themselves, much less obviously the individuals within the family unit.
Yeah, and let's go back to like how, what happened in your story. I mean, we've got up to you getting involved in all sorts of things, and then what happened?
Well, I'll just say this, that people that have a loved one that's struggling with addiction, and you have this sense that things are bad, they're probably worse than you think they are. At least in my case, my mom, I have people that suffer from addictions on both sides of my family, and cousins, aunts, uncles, family members that passed away, all these things. A lot of family members have died in recovery because they found recovery along the way. So I've seen it really on both sides, right? And it was, and really not even knowing how bad it was. I really had no idea that my grandfather, my mom's dad, was an alcoholic. But he died sober, so I never saw him drunk. I never saw him in that state, but I just knew him as my great G-Pops,
Yeah.
And so I didn't know that part of it. And so there's just things that, I think it's important for, kids to know the family history to a point.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, here's kind of like the makeup from a lot of people in your past. Now, when we can battle it through identity in Christ and sever those historical generations, right, then it's possible to break that generational sin. So, but for me, it was just insert crazy story from 14 to 29. Okay. It was just, I did a lot of wild stuff in my addiction, and I mean, the drunken logs are long, right? But the bottom line, it was loneliness. It was trying to fit in. It was sadness and desperation. And when you're dealing with like the depths of depravity I was dealing with suicide ideation, leading up before I found recovery, it's those things you really are afraid to tell other people because they might look at you in the way I would internalize it would be a condemning way, even though that wasn't their intention. It was all how I internalized stuff. But for me, leading up to when I found recovery, I was dealing a lot with self-harm and suicide ideation, and just really lost, completely lost. And I didn't like the guy I had become.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a traumatic childhood that would have said, oh yeah, that makes sense why you would become an alcoholic. I didn't have like a parent that beat me or, some major emotional things that happened to me that like really screwed me up. Yeah. It was just, I don't know, I found alcohol and it made me feel invincible in some ways, right? And so that continued. But leading up to, in June 7th, 2001, that was 60 something $1,000 in credit card debt.
Wow.
I was, I went out and drank and drove 8 nights a week, and I'd say that because it was like all the time. That's what my circle of people did, because that's just our environment. Right. But on the outside, I looked good. I was working out and had girlfriends, and I just had the image that I was okay, even though you could tell from my behavior that maybe I enjoyed substances a little too much.
Yeah.
Right. But I always had friends around me that were worse off than I was. So like the attention would be on them.
Yeah.
Like, man, look at him. He's much worse than that. So you had to have those people around you. That's just a little tip for people if you're trying to hide stuff. But it wasn't working out well. And so I was hanging out in a bar in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And keep in mind, like the months before this, I would literally see my car as I'm driving down the highway, veer off the highway and hit like a median or hit something, and it would explode. And I would actually see myself physically dead.
Wow.
Even though I was still in my car driving straight, but these things would start happening more and more. And I was afraid to tell colleagues or friends because I was afraid I'd lose my job, or they'd say you're nuts. Or so, going more nuts by not telling people is what was going on. And so I was hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Say that again.
You're just having these hallucinations.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I didn't know how to explain it. Like it was just weird. I'm like, what the heck? And I would have, 7, 8, 9 hour periods of blackout in the evenings and driving to casinos that were far distances away after the bars closed. And I would have no recollection of even going.
Wow.
And so, but again, I don't tell people that. It was just something that happened. I was like, oh, nuts. I did it again last night. And I wouldn't share that information. So I really started to self-loathe and really hate who Robbie Lohman had become. I was this fun, what I thought was a fun, happy-go-lucky, take life as it is kind of guy, but I really wasn't, and when you don't like who you are, you do really dumb stuff.
Yeah.
And well, it's stuff, it's dumb, but in the moment it doesn't, it just feels like that's kind of where you are. So I was hanging out in a bar that evening, and, it was loud music. It was, girls and dancing and just fun, right? Perceived fun, right? We think it's fun, but really I feel like most people that go out and get drunk with their friends and do that stuff, I really believe a large percentage don't even want to do it anymore. It's just what they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that was the lifestyle. And I, you go to a party and like, I'm just gonna have one drink tonight. And next thing you know, they're sloshed again. And it's like, dang it. I didn't want to do that again. Like in the Bible, it says, why do I keep doing the things I don't want to do?
Yeah.
And why don't I do the things I want to do?
Yeah.
Right. And that was like my whirlwind in my brain during that time. But this particular evening, I was hanging out in the bar in Fort Wayne, and then all of a sudden the bar got completely dead silent. And I personally audibly heard the words, "You're done."
Yeah.
And then the bar got really loud again. Now I was the only person that happened to that in the bar that evening, right?
Yeah.
That I'm aware of. And I looked at my friend Sean O'Brien. I was like, dude, I got to go home. Like, I think I'm done drinking. And he laughs and chuckles because he knows I'll be back at the bar tomorrow, probably for lunch or tomorrow night. But I drove home that night and something shifted in me, Najma. It shifted because I felt different. Like almost like I was done drinking, kind of like relieved I was finally done drinking. But I was completely hammered and driving home that night. So I was kind of like sober minded, but I was drunk driving.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever had like a time when you feel like a shift inside, but you're still like in the moment of what you don't want to be doing? Maybe I had that happen a few times, but this particular night I drove home and opened up my little, I lived in a 1-bedroom loft apartment, and opened up the door downstairs, walked up 12 steps to my loft apartment. And just next thing I knew, I was laying down on my workout bench with 350 pounds on a barbell. And I picked the barbell up off the rack and unhinged my elbows and just dropped that bar across my chest.
Oh.
Yeah. And that was the intention, I guess. It wasn't a pre-planned thing. It was, we talked about this driven by the subconscious, right? And I was driven by like self-hatred, and I hated myself, and I may as well die. Like, you suck, like goodbye, like all the messages that are opposite of my identity in Christ. Right.
Yeah.
But in the moment of me unhinging my elbows to take my life, next thing I knew, my dog was nudging my knee. And this is like split seconds of time, right? Like milliseconds, because I cannot hold that much weight. And all of a sudden my dog is just nudging my leg like, Dad, what are you doing? And my first thought was, holy cow, who's going to feed you tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
You know, so my heart broke for my dog, which I believe was God revealing himself to me through my dog, saying, I love you too much to lose you right now. You know, and I also believe that God was holding that barbell, but it was very symbolic that I couldn't even hold that weight myself sober, but God can hold the weight of my burdens, right? And so in these milliseconds of time of me trying to kill myself, my dog is nudging my leg, my heart's breaking for him. I start thinking about my mom and my dad, and I'm like, holy cow, what am I doing? You know, and with not my own strength, but his strength, we put that barbell back on the rack, and I felt like a completely different guy that evening. Then that moment right there, like I felt sober.
And how was your chest?
Well, it never hit my chest, because in the process of me literally unhinging my elbows to just drop it, that was the intention, I guess, was to kill myself across the chest. But again, what I believe happened was God stopped that, paused time, told my, it was like, Jake, my dog, go save your dad. And my heart literally broke for him. And I'm like, I don't want to, like, in my mind, like, I don't want to die. Like, what am I doing? And I ended up pouring out all my alcohol that evening. I had 2 full bottles of nice scotch in my apartment. But I woke up the next morning and I felt completely different. I felt like I had slept in peace for the first time that evening. I felt the love of God, and I knew I was going to be all right. And since that day, from a guy that could drink like 2 bottles of scotch in a day, partying and taking clients out and, marketing and sales and stuff. I did not, and that went on for years. I didn't go through detox. I didn't go through withdrawal. Like, it was almost like I had never, ever drank alcohol my entire life. And I have not had a craving or a desire to drink alcohol ever since that moment.
Wow. So that is instant deliverance.
It was. I'm like, God, can't you do that in these other areas of my life? But but it was instant deliverance. You're right. And my Aunt Carol took me to a recovery meeting, and I met people that were happy. They were loving life, and they were like talking about life has never been so joyful. And I'm like, joyful? What? Well, wait, let me think. Last night I tried to kill myself, and y'all are saying this is joyful. So I bought in 100%. I'm like, I'm in y'all's program. Like, let's do this thing. And I just started doing everything that they told me to do. And it worked for me because I did the work.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating in what I do now as an interventionist, working with families to give them this plan of recovery. And the ones that step into the plan, as close as they can, have a much higher success. I see their lives change dramatically. And the ones that kick and scream and say, well, it's their problem, I don't need to do anything, they did this. I'm like, man, the whole family has to heal. And when they do, everyone's chance of recovery is better. But when it's always the loved one, the addict, the person with the substance abuse, whatever you want to call it, people want to call it, it's their problem. It's like, no, it's a whole family thing. So if the family can learn the same language and recovery process, recovery is a beautiful thing. Don't be a jerk, clean house every day, like you make amends, forgive people. I mean, it's like a really simple plan that we make very complicated. And I just bought into it, right from the beginning. And when you're single, it's much easier to do recovery in a lot of ways, because it's just you don't have kids. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a wife. It was just like single. And then life changed later for me, and I got off track again, which, is what, led to my own mental breakdown in recovery. But speaking specifically to substance abuse, it was a beautiful thing to be freed from that.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about, what happened later and the mental breakdown and the recovery from that?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, here's the thing. It's not just getting rid of the substances, because the substances are just a cover up for what's going on deep down inside.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a webinar I put together called the trifecta of recovery: coaching, counseling, and community. Right. So community is huge because you need that immediate support to be in the present right now. Right. And it's just, so I jumped into community. I mean, I had to learn how to, I literally had to learn how to like read a book sober, or play golf sober, or go on a date sober, go on a date sober without thinking about sex. It was like actually have true, authentic relationships with people. And so I had to learn how to do all this stuff sober, and I can learn to do that on my own. So I jumped into the community piece, right, which was really important. I didn't do a whole lot of counseling, which when you look back on it, like I don't have regrets in my life, but it was like, it would have been nice to do counseling back then to understand like how I was wired, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to seek counseling to understand your past. And then the coaching is is going forward, right? So it's like, how are we going to envision going forward? So for me, I was all involved in community. I was single. I was doing some cool stuff, just kind of recovery taught me that I can do anything in recovery as long as my spiritual conditioning is good.
Right.
Right. So I had sponsors, I had friends, and it was like, hey, I got this idea. And they'd be like, really? Seriously? So I would check myself with people, but over time I got to do some cool stuff. Like in 2003, I ran my first marathon ever over in Rome, Italy.
All right.
And it was with Team Diabetes, right? And so I had to raise money to do that. And people sent me money for a guy that used to take money. You know what I mean? And so there was redemption there. And then, I ended up getting a job as a college career counselor, which was really cool and a great career that I had. And then it was kind of like, I feel like God was calling me to do something bigger. So I bought an RV, I quit my job, bought an RV, traveled the country to interview people on why they love what they do.
Yeah.
Because I'm fascinated by people's stories, like you doing podcasting, and I love doing podcasting, and people's stories are just awesome.
They are.
Right? With education in the middle. That's why I keep dripping in little bits of like intervention stuff. And it's like, hey, here's some meat for you. If you're struggling with addiction and you don't know what to do, reach out to someone like myself for help and have the conversation and say, hey, things are off a little bit. Maybe you don't need a full on intervention. Maybe you just need a little kick in the butt, you know what I mean, to get on the right track. But so for me, I was in this great world of recovery and doing awesome things. And I ended up moving to Vail, Colorado, when my RV broke down to live in my brother's basement to work on this documentary I was doing. But in there, anywhere I go, like when I went to Rome in 2003 for that marathon, I didn't really care about the Pantheon or the Colosseum. I cared about finding an AA meeting in Rome. And it was so cool when I found one, and it was like people from all over the world were there. I mean, I cared about seeing the, monuments and stuff, but I was like, man, I just want to go to an AA meeting like in Rome. That'd be so cool. And I found one, and it was neat. But when I moved to Vail, it was like recovery is everywhere. So people that say I cannot find recovery somewhere, they're not looking for it. Especially now with, COVID put everybody online, which is not the same thing. Like I would love to be sitting in a room with you right now, having this conversation, right. And having a cup of coffee together than being on Zoom. But so recovery's everywhere. So I moved to Vail and I ended up meeting my wife at a Christian youth event over here in Denver that I came to. And I was like, man, she's pretty and she works. And it was just a cool connection that we had, but it was all innocent because I was working on this huge 3-day Christian music festival that God put on my heart. Right. And she ended up working for the largest Christian radio station, which, later it led to a lot of connections, but in the middle of it, we're like, we love music, we love dance, we love all this stuff. And, but that, then I became a husband, which I hadn't been before in recovery. I had an alcoholic marriage, which was just destructive and just, we both drank differently. We just weren't matched. Our relationship was based on sex and drinking, and that's not a good relationship for any marriage. So fortunately, my wife now she's not an alcoholic. She's not an addict, and she doesn't struggle with substances, and she gets me to a point. I'm kind of a confusing guy sometimes, but we ended up getting married in 2006, and my son was born in 2007, right? And my daughter was born in 2010.
Yeah.
And so in a short period of time, like I had left my community in Vail, moved to Denver. I was Rob Lohman in Vail, and in Denver I was Jennifer's husband.
Right.
So my community was gone. And that was such a big part of my recovery. Like my community literally was over there, and I didn't feel like I had community over here.
Yeah.
And over time of like feeling, because I wasn't doing a great job as being a great provider in the beginning of our marriage. And there's a whole bunch of part to like this story, but over time I started like believing some other lies about myself that I wasn't good enough. You're not a good provider. So over time and having a business that I had that took off, and then after 2.5 years, it went away because of sales and production numbers. So I feel like I had failed as a husband and a father. And this is in 2011.
Right.
But I wasn't telling anyone about that, right? Because I don't want you to look at me and feel like, man, you really failed. Because I already told myself I failed. Because again, now I'm back in this space of being a husband, father, and a businessman. I stopped doing recovery. I stopped going to meetings. I stopped going to men's groups. I stopped talking to mentors. And so I had to completely isolated myself from my wife, whom I thought in my mind, I told myself that she thought I was a loser and I had failed. And there's arguments and stuff we had that could feed into that, right? Like, why can't you do this? And I'm like, I don't know. But my responsibility, because I used to blame my wife for, I used to say, you emasculated me and stuff like that, which was immature. But what happened was I allowed those comments, which I had brought upon our marriage. I internalized them in a way that I felt I had failed. And that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. It's how I internalized the messages being tossed at me. I used to blame her for that. But over time I had to realize like, hey, that's your responsibility, bro. Like, man up. Like, you can't blame people for that. Like my faith was not really strong enough.
Yeah.
My identity in Christ was not really strong enough. Right. Because if I really believed that stuff, it doesn't matter who says what, a boss, a wife, a policeman, your kid. Now, if everyone's saying those things, maybe you take a look at it. But a lot of times I feel like it's other people's past, like it was my past creeping in. Right. So in 2011, I was back to dealing with suicide ideation again. I was believing the lies in my head to the point where I hated it so much that one day I actually took my fist and I jacked myself in the side of the head, hit myself right here so hard that it actually felt good. Because there's this chemical called dopamine in our brain.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet was I was really bad at my gambling addiction because I was fear driven and I was a fear driven scarcity mentality guy.
Right.
So I had to take $400 to the casino to go try to win 4,000 so I could pay rent. You know what I mean? And so I'd lied to myself enough that my excitement for life had depleted so much that physical hit to my brain when I actually saw a flash of light gave me a shot of dopamine I hadn't had in a while. And it felt good. And that sounds weird, doesn't it? It felt good to kick your own ass. Sorry. But I got to a point so bad where I literally would hit myself so many times in the head I couldn't put my glasses on because the side of my head hurt so bad. So some people cut, right? Some people use drugs and some people masturbate and some people do like all sorts shop. Yeah. My physical harm came from me hurting myself. And I didn't tell my wife. I would do it in private. But then when I lost my agency, like that was just nail in the coffin. Like I had failed. And I'm 11 years off of substances. Like I haven't touched a drug or alcohol in 11 years, right?
Yeah.
So 2012, the mental breakdown came one night. And there's some things that were going on that day that just emphasized that I wasn't measuring up. One was an inspirational movie with a lot of redemption, but I heard the pain in the movie. We were in lots of credit card debt again because I lost my business the year before and had credit card debt from that my wife had no clue about.
Right.
Our marriage wasn't great again, and so when you look at all those recipes, like, dude, you failed. And so when I sit down and talk to families now and I hear that, I'm like, man, I get it. Like, I understand, like you got a second mortgage on the house and your wife doesn't know that. Okay, well, that's done. Like now we need to move forward. We got to get to the point of honesty and openness somehow and figure out how do we move forward? Because you can't undo your second mortgage. right? You can't undo the fact that you have shot this much heroin and all those things. But now today we have a moment of decision. And this night, when my family was in bed, I got up and I was looking for a side job. I was working on a side job and then working on a small little business I was trying to get going too.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I just said, hey, like if I were having a conversation, I'd say, Najma, I just need to clean the house because it's a mess. I was probably even talking to myself that night because I hate clutter.
Right.
I don't know how you deal with clutter, but I didn't know I hated clutter until I knew I hated clutter. And I didn't know how much I hated clutter at this point in my life. So my life was out of control, right? We were in debt, like my marriage. Everything was just out of control. And so when I look back on it, it's almost like you try to take control of your life sometimes and you don't even know it, right? And so in my mental blackout, I ended up grabbing a box of matches and lit some boxes on fire on my covered patio. And I couldn't stop it. And that was where my mental breakdown took me. Was no one got hurt, thank God. We were in a townhouse community. My whole family and I got out, and my neighbors got out. But as soon as we walked out the front door, our whole entire patio exploded.
Wow.
And my first thought was, why did the firefighters kick the glass out? I was like, because I saw the fire rush in and like literally our front window turned black soot at 1:30 in the morning. And it was this moment of like, holy cow, how did you get here, bro? And so addict mind kicked in. I was still gambling a bunch. I lied about it for 3 weeks. And then eventually just had to come clean to my wife due to circumstances and conviction, and just knew it was the right thing to do. And there was in that moment of clarity, I was like, man, now we need to start the healing process. Yeah. And there's so many miracles that God did in this. It was crazy, but it was really getting humble and vulnerable. And I ran back to church. I ran back to AA meetings. I ran back and had to go see shrinks and psychiatrists, like mandated, just because to figure out what the heck was wrong with me. And I wanted to know what was wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because I was living in the pit with Satan during that part of my life. It was just like, I believed all those lies. That's why I'm so passionate now about believing in who you are in Christ. Yeah. Right. And I know there's a lot of people aren't believers and stuff like that can listen in and just be like, what the heck are you talking about? Like there's nothing better than to believe when I look at this list in front of me that I am God's child. I'm a saint. I'm a member of Christ's body. I'm his workmanship. I'm God's temple. I'm a minister of reconciliation. I'm free from condemnation. I'm a citizen of heaven. I'm a new creation. Like all those things, to believe them because they're truths about us. Yeah. There's nothing better than that. So I'm so passionate about that now. But after my breakdown, I'll just kind of give you a snapshot of that. It was several months later, I ended up confessing to authorities, and just trusted God with the outcome, to which 6 months later, I was arrested on 19 felonies and 13 misdemeanors. Wow. And, having felonies on your record is not an easy thing, which we found out later. And meanwhile, my wife is having to go through this journey of, is my husband a psychopath? Like, what happened? So in her exploration and devotion with God was just like, that's my son that got lost. And so she stayed with me through all this, which is awesome. Yeah. And then in July 7th of 2013, I got sentenced to, which was supposed to be anywhere from 2 years of work release to 56 years in prison. And I got a 13-year prison sentence in 2013. So here we are in 2021, and I'm talking to you. Yeah. And I've been talking to people out here for a while. So within 10 and a half months, I was released from prison to a halfway house, thank God. And just an amazing journey of miracles that God did, from what happened to me when I was incarcerated to where I had all this time. So I studied and I read. And I know on the podcast, people can't see the video, but over my shoulder, I have the stack of books, and they're all these books I read during my incarceration. Right. And they were all about bettering yourself. They're about your identity in Christ and just biblical great principles. And so I studied and read 42 books, and it was amazing for me. Meanwhile, my wife and kids are back home. My daughter was 3 when I left, and my son was 5, right? She's back home having to be a single mom
Yeah.
and provide. And she's like, that's really great, honey. You're having like a seminary experience in prison and all this time to read, but I'm trying to figure out how to put food on the table and like get to work. So she had to endure a lot. So power to the single mothers out there that have been forced into a situation to be a single mom due to divorce or, or incarceration or death or whatever it might be. Right. And it's hard. And I know she had a lot of hard things there, but and so she had to go through her journey and I was going through my journey, and we didn't journey together. We journeyed separately.
Yeah.
So when I got home, we had to learn how to journey together.
Yeah.
Which brought up a lot of other stuff. But the great thing is that God's a God of redemption, and so no matter how severed a relationship might be, whether incarceration or addiction or, adultery or whatever it might be, I believe there's always a chance for reconciliation if both people are willing to step into that.
Yeah, there is.
Whole family and everything. So God's done amazing miracles through all that. And then it was through the journey of just having felonies on my record and stuff like that too. It was like, finding a good career direction. And so after 9 failed attempts or rejections because of just having a felony on my record, didn't matter what it was, they were just like, well, sorry. And the manager's like, dude, I'll totally hire you, but we got to get you to pass this test or background check. And so through all that, I just did what a lot of people with felonies do. We start our own businesses.
Yeah.
And I got trained to do interventions and coaching, and I've been doing that since really January 1st, 2016.
Okay.
And I help families all over the country navigate the struggles of addiction and the plights of mental health and just getting people on the right track. And so I love what I do now through podcasting and interventions and, and speaking on summits and challenges and just being a part of people's journeys and inviting them to be a part of mine on the shows that I do.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing now. And again, there's 1,000 other stories I could tell you in there, but that's kind of the journey that I've been on and the blessing I get to do now and to do what I get to do to help families change their own direction.
Wow. And you've been doing this for 5 years now.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been ups and downs, and with COVID, that changed a lot of things last year, and people flying and not flying and stuff now. But I think now that like kind of getting back to normal a little bit too, is we have a lot of great treatment centers in Colorado, but it just depends on the situation. I mean, sometimes people need to leave the state to go get some help, and then they need a great recovery plan when they get home to reacclimate, and the family needs their own recovery plan. And so, for just over 5 years, I've been helping families all over the country and flying here and there and in between and just putting the proper plan. Because some people will call me up and the addiction world is a very interesting one. Mm. And the recovery world is a fascinating one as well. Mm. It's just educating people on the process. But a lot of people will call and say, I need an intervention. They're freaking out because their life situation says it's time to freak out.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times an intervention may not be the full thing they need. And I'm very open with that. I'm not just going to say, hey, let's do an intervention. Let's get paid and move on. No, I'm like, well, would your husband be open to just having coffee with me? Well, I don't know. We'll try it. And I've helped many men and women get into treatment just by having coffee. Yeah. Or a treatment program, or just going to Celebrate Recovery, or just saying, hey, try this. I mean, I got sober going to AA. Didn't cost me a penny. But I had willingness and I had desire and I was committed to do the work. Yeah. Right? Some people just need that extra help. They need the intensive, therapy and stuff in a short period of time, which works. So my goal is just to really help put a plan together for a family to say, hey, let's look at the options. What makes the most sense? Yeah. What's not going to cause you to go do a second or third? I mean, I'll run into some people and they've spent $500,000 or more on send their kid or loved one to treatment over and over and over again. I'm like, why are you going to send your loved one on another vacation for 30 to 90 days when they could teach the class? So I'm very open in helping people figure out the right plan to move forward in their life.
Yeah, and what kind of people do you see? Do you see are the people you see from the Christian community, or is it outside the Christian community mostly?
It's all over. I mean, I help people from, it doesn't matter where they're coming from to get the help, right? But what I tell people is if you want a really cool experience from an intervention standpoint and they are open to a Christian perspective, because sometimes the family has the faith, their loved ones with the addiction had faith, but they lost it because they're in their addiction, right? And they could care two rats less about Jesus, really.
Yeah,
Like, I don't care. Like, that will make them run away. Well, the family in the process might still want that element.
yeah,
And so when you can bring prayer and you can bring worship, and I can text you and say, hey, Fred, I was thinking about you today. Here's a song, and it could be, beautifully broken or something. And I can send that to them and just a text to encourage them. I love that. Like that's one of my niches, if you will. Like I get real excited with the faith perspective, but if that's not their interest, it doesn't matter. Like it's really the same process. It just brings in different elements of worship and praise and things along the way to really connect us to God and those things. But yeah, I mean, if family comes in and they could care less about God or Jesus, well, we're still going to do the intervention and get their loved one to the right type of a treatment facility.
yeah, yeah.
I just happen to see people that have the best success that go to a faith-based program that actually use the word Jesus Christ in a healthy way, that it works. And I've reached out to several programs. So one of the great things about using an interventionist like myself is that you could call a program if you wanted to. Like, let's say you had a friend and they were struggling and you said, hey, I want a Christian program, and you call 5 places and 3 of them say, we have a Christian track. It's a great program. They're like, oh, great. And then your loved one goes there and their Christian track is, here's a Bible and you get one Celebrate Recovery meeting a month. But the rest of it's just secular.
Yeah,
Right? So when you can actually know that a program truly fits your needs and they're not just guiding you in a direction because you're getting paid by the treatment center, right?
yeah,
So it's a tricky world because it's a desperate time for a lot of people, and people can get taken advantage of. And my role and goal as an interventionist is to help you with the appropriate plan. Whether you use me or not, I want you to make sure you have the right plan, right? But using an interventionist brings the neutral party into the room. Like, who's that guy? And it's like, well, how do you know me, man? Like, how do you understand what I've been through? I was like, well, you want a quick snapshot? Okay. Grew up in a Christian home, drank and drugged from 14 to 29, gambled till I was 47 years old, because I'm 3.5 years clean of gambling right now. So 46, 2.5 years of gambling. Sorry. But I'll tell them these stories. I went to prison during this time of my life. And I was like, so I get it. So now if we can move on to you, and I get them to open up and just how their life isn't the way they really want it right now, and just, I want help, and get them to a point where they want help instead of feeling like they are forced by their family to go or else. And sometimes the or else is a necessary part of this. Like, you go or you're out. And I don't like those scenarios, but sometimes it's that desperate enough where you have to protect the family and other kids in the home, to where the loved one just needs to get out of the house. And today's the day to go somewhere. You can either go to treatment or you can go on the street with a trash bag. What's your preference today? Now, again, I don't like those moments of ultimatum, and I rarely ever get to that in the process. But it's to have the loved one open up and say, break down and just start crying like, yeah, I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. Like, I want help. And it's like, sweet, let's go. We're getting out of here and let's go get some help.
yeah, yeah. And do you find that with the families, do you find what percentage are kind of willing, like the whole family is willing to get involved, and what percentage they're not, they just think, well, it's this person?
Well, unfortunately, the family is a lot harder than the loved one suffering from addiction, because it's hard to see it's hard for the family to see their part in it.
Yeah.
When they're not the one, quote unquote, destroying the family. And so when I sit down with like a husband and a wife and they've been married for 20 years, I'll say, he's been this way ever since I've known him. Okay. In that statement, and there's this there's this word of it's kind of like, well, you've been there the whole time, so let's be part of the solution now.
Yeah.
Because obviously the problem is here, and you've both been there the whole entire time. And I don't like the word enabling, right? I like this word. It's called and not codependence. There's one of my colleagues that uses the word prodependence.
Yeah.
Right. And when it's prodependence is basically saying, hey, let's just agree that everyone in this situation has done the best they can with the tools that they have. Now, are you willing to get some new tools? Not just for your loved one, but are you willing to get some new tools yourself? And you'd be surprised at how many families are like, well, no, it's still their problem. So it's really trying to hold the mirror in front of the family and saying, hey, this is a family disease. Like your kids that are 7, 8, and 12 or whatever, they are going to be impacted by this. Whether you think they're young enough, they're not getting that impacted. Yes, they are. They're not feeling the love in the house. They hear the arguing, the door slamming. Now they're hiding in the closet. Now they're, and then you can connect the kids to family programs that help children understand like the dynamics that, it's not their fault. But later on in life, I mean, that's why they have adult children of alcoholics and other great programs out there, because it does affect you.
Yeah.
So the family sometimes is a lot harder to help than the loved one that's had the addiction problem.
Yeah. And then what happens in the cases when the family isn't getting involved in the recovery and in that way?
Well, a lot of times you can see the loved one, like the one that's now in recovery, values their recovery so much that they now realize how toxic their entire family was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there's plans you could put in place, like not moving back into your environment, moving into a sober living house, staying in an outpatient recovery program to help you in that, or plug into a church, or get them plugged into the right resources to help them stay sober. Because what happens is a lot of times the loved one will go away and the family's like, okay, you're fixed. Let's come on back home. It's like, no, man, this whole entire system's screwed up. Like, we need some serious help. So in a lot of treatment centers, if they're a good treatment center, which are the only ones I refer to, I work with them on the reentry plan, or the coming back home plan, aftercare plan. I couldn't remember that word. And, but it's these things of, hey, like we talk through that, because when you're away in your little recovery bubble, right? It's kind of easy sometimes to do recovery when you're in a treatment center.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's easy to focus on my identity in Christ when I was incarcerated, right? Because I had time. But some people will literally go to treatment and they won't ever talk about their past. They won't. I mean, I had a client that went one time and he was a bar brawler that he fought every single 45-year-old man he could ever see because that he hated his father.
Yeah.
But while he was in treatment, he never, ever, ever opened up about his hatred towards his father, right? So this young man got out of treatment, and what happened? He went right back at it because he didn't do aftercare. He didn't do anything, and he didn't work through some of the trauma, or at least get it started. So that's why I'm so big on coaching, counseling, and community for the family too, of programs for the family members. So when you're talking the whole system, like if they're not engaging and stuff, I mean, the therapists are going to be talking to them at treatment. A lot of every program I refer to has a family program attached to it, the part of it. But if they don't, I mean, you got to look out for the love for the person. Like, hey, you got this new path. Like, you may just not need to go home. But my wife, and I get it, but that's really toxic still, and she's not willing to get help. So now, and sometimes I've even had this happen where the husband came home from treatment and then the wife went to treatment. So it varies, but it's similar, and it's really just helping the entire family figure out a pathway to recovery, and they can choose to use it or not. The ones that do have longevity and recovery, and hopefully will never have addiction in their family again. And the ones that don't, they'll be right back at it sooner or later. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, what would happen? I don't know if you had this kind of situation, but like you're talking about the person, the one with the problem, so to speak, because it's only their problem. They've been through recovery, but the family is just not willing to get anything sorted. And, you know, say it's the husband, so he's not gone back yet to the family, but you know what happens? I mean, obviously, then you've got this situation where he's separated from his children still.
Yeah, it's really case by case basis. I mean, it just matters on what is the most important thing for them,
Mm.
you know, because here's one thing you'll notice is that when addiction, like when substances are removed from your body for a while and you used to have a dependence on them, if you go back to them, chances are it's going to be a lot worse than it was before,
Yeah,
much faster, right? So if loved one that went to get help chooses to move back into the home and it's toxic and he chooses to not engage in his recovery anymore, chances are that situation is getting a lot worse, a lot faster.
yeah, yeah.
And sometimes it leads to just temporary separation.
Mm.
You know, sometimes it flips around like the situation I was telling you about where it turns out it's a reverse intervention back to the spouse and say, hey, look, this is never going to work. And it's not to say, hey, I'm all high and mighty and holy because I went to treatment, but it's like, hey, I'm a lot better now. And I don't like it's the saying that I will love you in your recovery, but I will not support your addiction.
Yeah,
And then it comes to a necessity for the children. If there's children involved, like if the children are in danger, you know, sometimes, I mean, you never want to have it happen, but it could be situations where you get CPS involved, which heaven forbid you don't want that, right? But that's one of the things you can kind of like dangle over somebody. Is like, hey, this is a danger and everyone's aware of it. So you really need to get some help or things are going to get a lot worse. And so it's creating a loving way to present that information. But sometimes I've had where spouses or the kids, not kids, like, you know, young adults, they just stayed where they went to recovery and built a new life there because they had to.
yeah,
And then it involves the court system and then the custody battles and all those things. But I mean, sometimes people just have to take drastic measures because they know and they believe for themselves that they're going to die if they ever pick up substances again. So if you have a loved one that's still shooting up and smoking pot and having parties on the weekends and you come home from recovery and you're living there, well, what chances are you're going to be right back in that scene very quickly. And it's going to get ugly really fast. So situations are different all the time, but the general thing is the ones that want to get healthier are going to get healthier. The ones that don't, won't. And they'll be calling me again. I mean, I've done a second intervention for families before because it's not to say, so let me tell you this. So intervention, it's a process.
yeah,
So even if the loved one doesn't want to get help, then you create the environment to where they are going to want help soon.
yeah,
And that's why having a phone call with somebody says, hey, let's hear the whole story. Because in the process of interventions, when people call me, we'll have that initial call. And then if I feel and they feel like it's necessary to move forward, I'll talk to every single person in their family for 30 to 45 minutes and get a whole history. Because you know stuff about one of your relatives that your other relative doesn't know.
mm,
And when you hear all that, it's like, wow, okay. All right, here's the plan I think will work. And then we talk about it and we make a decision together as during the family meetings and everything. And we pre-plan and all these aspects. So I listen very intentionally and then say, okay, because it's not cookie cutter. I know some people do interventions. It's like cookie cutter. They do the same thing every single time, no matter what. I'm like, man, we're dealing with humanity here
yeah,
and the fallenness of man. And
yeah,
but again, when you bring the Christian perspective into it, it's awesome because you can be like, okay, we're gonna get it. We're gonna get a sozo. We're gonna pray against this. We're gonna get everyone on the right path. And usually, a Christian family wants to dive into that very deeply because they're tired of the pain.
yeah. And what coaching programs do you offer? What different coaching programs?
So I do a lot of coaching with the family and the loved one when they get back, right? And interestingly enough, like when you and I connected and everything, and it was, when you're doing coaching and interventions and podcasting, all this stuff, it dilutes sometimes a lot of the message, right, with people. So, as for 2021, my main 100% focus is going to be on interventions.
Right.
and helping families stay in that lane, which involves a lot of coaching with the family and the loved one and everything like that. But as far as like coaching programs and things like that as well, I'm kind of putting those on hold
Yeah.
for a while, because it's literally just staying in this lane of doing interventions because I do them well. And that's where I see a lot of the biggest growth and biggest impact with people is when you can change a family system in a generation of people that suffer from addictions. I mean, you change thousands of lives impacted in the future. And so I have such a heart for working with families in that regards too. And so for me, I'm choosing through prayer and meditation and, my coaches and everything is to, put some stuff kind of on the side, on hold for a while, and just focus on interventions for the next, 12 months and just help as many people as I can, because you help, again, you help one addict change their life. Person suffer from, now some people get hung up on terms like, well, I don't like to call them addicts. I call them person that has a substance abuse. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
Person that has a situation that they having trouble getting out of, right? If I can help that person change, it can change a generation of people.
Yeah. Change their children and children's children.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing when when you look at, again, just family histories of people, when you get to know them and do, some people do genealograms and get really detailed with all that stuff, but the history a lot of times. And, but if that person can really take hold recovery and get counseling to break free from the past, get coaching to see the future, and have that community to enjoy the present. I mean, it is such an awesome thing to witness for people. And that's the gift I want to give people. And here's another thing I think it's important. I should have said this earlier, but you'll hear people say, well, Christina hasn't gotten to her bottom yet. We're just going to wait till Christina gets to her bottom and then we'll help her then. It's like, wow, what if we brought the bottom to Christina and said, look, here's where you're going. Would you like to get off the elevator now and start a different pathway? And it's the way I look at interventions is I'm helping formulate a plan to bring the bottom to the family instead of waiting until they get a DUI or, let's just wait till they kill somebody while they're drinking and driving. Then they'll change. I'm like, no, let's stop them before they kill somebody so they have a chance to still live a good life free from addiction. So let's bring the bottom up instead of waiting for the bottom to fall out.
Absolutely.
So that's my goal. That's where I know God's called me to go. And, and for a while it's kind of like, I'm just going to go down to Christian interventions. That's all I do is work with Christian treatment centers. I'm like, that's not even fair to the people that need the help, that can receive my expertise. But I will say that if families come in and they have a relationship with Christ already, or they just believe that that's possible, so much more magic and wonder happens when we bring that element in. But if that's not the case, I've helped hundreds of families that didn't care less about Jesus, but they just know they have a situation. Someone's going to die if we don't do something, and we had to change something, and their stars in life changed. And then later they come back and like, hey, tell me more about, like, do you really believe all that Jesus stuff you talk about? Like, totally. And here's why. And I get to share that part of my testimony with them.
It's amazing. Yeah. And where can people find you?
They can find me in the local grocery store. No, they can find me at liftedfromtherut.com. And so just go to liftedfromtherut.com. I'm on Facebook and social media and stuff like that too. But the easiest way is to go there, or they can just call me directly at 970-331-4469. Shoot me a text and say, I got a situation I need to talk to you about. We'll hop on the phone, have a call, and see if I can help you. And if I can't or whatever, based on resources, whatever, I'll help you find the right place to go, the right path to go down. And all I want is for people to not live in the morass of self-pity that I lived in for way too long in my life, and just kind of wasted a lot of my time.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And it's really good. I think the work that you're doing, it's just, helping people and families and future generations. It's all, it's like, not, is domino effect the right word? Like it can have a domino effect.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't matter where anyone lives in the world. I mean, they can reach out to me if they want to send me an email off the website or whatever, is to, helping people virtually. I do that all the time too. I just help them put a plan together. And if they need an interventionist and they live in like Zimbabwe, well, it would cost a lot of money to get me to Zimbabwe to come down and do an intervention. But give me enough time and I will find somebody that does what I do where you are to help you locally in like another country.
Okay.
So it's something like, because I'm part of this huge network of people, right? And it's if it's because you hire an interventionist and they fly into everything. Well, if your budget, like you don't have funds and it's like, we can't afford a plane ticket, we can't afford to go out of state. I'm like, cool. Well, let's find someone that can locally and just, give me a very, very, very short period of time. And I'll reach out to my networks and say, does anyone know anybody? And, blah, 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 blah. And they'll say, no. And somebody will know somebody somewhere and say, okay, here's a person you can reach out to. And then if I don't know who the heck they are, I'm not going to refer them to you, but I'll verify them first because it's my name on it. It's my reputation on the line. If I refer you to someone and they're horrible, it's like, great job, Rob. I'm like, no, I don't want to tarnish my great, my reputation by giving you a bad person to work with.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So people listening from anywhere can get in touch with you, not just in the States.
Oh yeah, totally, anywhere. And I'll help you find somebody. I'll do my best to put the feelers out and try to find someone locally for you, or just coach you through the process and say, here's what you can do. I mean, it helps when you have a neutral party in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
But it is possible to do an intervention and just be coached through the process. It really depends on the situation, because there's some where that would never, ever, ever, ever work. And some where I'd be like, yeah, this is totally what you need to do. Just do this, 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 and this. And it's like, wow, thanks, Rob. You're welcome. Let me know how it goes.
Excellent. So thank you, Rob. Thank you for your story, your amazing story.
Yeah, well, thank you for stepping up and doing what you're doing to get messages out like this to people and have your own platform that you can, because I have a couple podcast shows and stuff that I do as well. And it's like, just to share those with people and say, hey, go listen to this. I'll text clients, hey, go listen to this interview I did with so-and-so. And it fits your situation. Just listen to it. And you know what percentage of people will listen to it?
Well,
like not a lot. I'm like, you didn't listen to it, did you? No. So it shows me that the family's not willing to take steps to learn. Some of those times are just ways to see if the family's willing to do something. It's like, well, no, I didn't have time. Like if you went to the bathroom, you had time to do it because you could listen to it while you're on the toilet. I'll tell them, it's like you can if you want to.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of importance and priority. So.
And what's the name of your podcast?
So I have the Addiction, Freedom, and Faith. And then Beyond the Bars Radio.
And how often do they come out?
So they'll be coming out more frequently now in March of this year, whenever, when in 2021 and beyond. I took a little bit of a break for the beginning of this year just because I was focused on other things. But if you look at both those shows, there's about 125, 130 episodes that people could listen to and just scroll through and find them. But yeah, you'll start seeing at least 4 a month coming out going forward. So
on each?
4 a month. Yeah. That's the plan right now. I'll say that out loud. And like I said, God keeps, because podcasting is very time consuming, as you know.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't want to be distracted from the avenues that God's calling me down, because podcasting is cool. Mm-hmm. It's fun. People's stories are great.
Yeah.
So the goal is to get them out consistently again, like I did all last year. Honestly, just figuring out the rhythm I want to get into for 2021 with that. Mm-hmm. And, but regardless, between both shows, there would be at least 4 episodes coming out between the 2 shows, not for each one. So you'll just have to subscribe, and you'll have to see when the things come out, people. So go check them out, subscribe, and then you'll get notified when a new episode comes out.
Okay. Thank you again, Rob. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yep. You're awesome. 7 hours apart, we can do this thing virtually. It's great. I love it. So hope you have an awesome day today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wellbeing in the Kingdom. the show which has been created to empower you to take action towards your greater well-being in all its forms. If you have enjoyed, learned from, or been inspired by today's episode, then please help to support the show by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, click the link in the show notes now.